Welcome to FO Talks. My name is Rohan Khattar Singh. Today we're going to be talking with Sam Rauss. He is a David Bose resident writing fellow at Young Voices. Welcome, Sam.
Thank you so much for having me this morning.
So, Sam, you recently wrote about the Biden era inflation policies and you called their subsidies giveaways. Can you break down why you think these are a waste of taxpayer money?
So during the Biden administration, the Inflation Reduction Act, which I find is very ironically named, included a number of subsidies for the development and growth of various different various different types of energy infrastructure. And in particularly, there were a number of subsidies given away to solar and wind companies to the tune of billions and billions of dollars annually, likely running on several trillion over the next decade, up to 10 trillion in the next 2 decades. And I think that while there are many strong arguments to have in the energy sector around what energy is best poised for our future, particularly as we now need a lot more energy with AI, a lot more energy with the switch to a lot of electricity-based technology. Um, these were really corporate handouts. It was using taxpayer money to continue subsidizing industries that are not new. They're not on the precipice of brand new technology. They're not struggling to um, build themselves up and exist. But what they are struggling to do is to topple other sectors of the energy debate, the traditional oil and gas, but also geothermal and nuclear energy that's becoming more popular and more used. And so I think that they were really giveaways to try to favor certain energy sources over others rather than letting the market dictate this, rather than letting technology and innovation drive the ultimate outcome. It was trying to decide for people that this was, the cleaner, greener option, and that this is what the Biden administration saw. And it was extremely costly and was going to continue to skyrocket the United States debt in the coming years.
So let's talk about that. You're saying that there was prejudices about energy. You're saying that the Biden administration wanted to promote certain kinds of energies versus the other.
Yeah, I think that there has been a growing prejudice among a more progressive faction in the United States for the past decade against coal, against oil drilling, against these quote unquote fossil fuels, and the idea that they are less environmentally sound, that they may come with different risks to individuals and the environment when it comes to their extraction. And so there's been a big push to try to go net zero, trying to go carbon neutral, pushing these quote unquote green energies that are not going to release gases, not going to potentially damage water. And so the big push was towards particularly solar and wind were the ones that got some of the biggest handouts from the Inflation Reduction Act subsidies. Rather than, there's a big conversation now around nuclear, I think is really interesting. There's other energy sectors, energy options that I'm not as familiar with. But yeah, there was really a favoritism played to one of these rather than a conversation about where these sources are going, what the technology currently is with regards to, particularly solar batteries are still struggling to advance to where they need to be reliable and usable across the country. No, there was really just a quick push to try to pick one over the other, rather than uh, yeah, take a balanced and fair approach. And yeah, a little bit of a demonization, I think, of some of those traditional energy sectors that we've used in this country for so long.
All right, so let's come to today. Let's look at U.S. President Donald Trump's Big Beautiful Act. It's gone ahead and it's cut solar and wind tax credits. But is that a good thing for Americans, or is this bad for America's clean energy, green future?
Yeah, so particularly cut out the corporate subsidies for solar and wind. I believe that they're slowly sunsetting the resident solar panel subsidy, but I think that will continue on in various forms on the state level, as we see particularly blue states are most interested in that. Some of the Sun Belt states where it's more useful are particularly interested in that. Um, but these corporate handouts, I think, will allow us to develop an energy sector in the coming decade that is meeting what consumer needs are, which is safe, reliable, and affordable. I think that this push to try to put ideology and judgment into these decisions rather than letting it be dictated by the market forces that we traditionally see determine what products are used, what resources are being used, with careful consideration as to their environmental impact and consumer choice driving that. I think if consumers were particularly concerned with the impact of certain energy based off of certain events, they would dictate this. But what we see right now is Americans are getting their foot back with regards to our economy. They're getting their financials in line, and one of the things that is so heavily impacted is obviously the cost of their electric bill, the cost of their AC, and the energy that they use on a daily basis, whether that be for their car or other resources. And so affordability is clearly the name of the game in the Trump administration, and they're not letting that be impacted by what this Inflation Reduction Act attempt was. So I think it's really in line with focusing much more on the individual consumer in America, less so than these abstract political arguments that we had seen go on that were kind of forgetting, how much, particularly how much people were struggling with inflation and the after effects of the COVID pandemic on the United States economy.
All right, so let's talk about the costs that could be visible. I'm talking about the environmental costs. A lot of people, including scientists, are saying that the Big Beautiful Act is going to cook the planet. What is your answer to them, and what is your opinion on that?
I think that there's been a lot of misconceptions around these different sources of energy. I think particularly um, there's been, all forms of energy, both the traditional fossil fuels and these quote unquote green energies, have been hamstringed by an environmental process under NEPA, under other legislation that slows growth and development, slows implementation of new technologies, of new processes. That doesn't serve any of us. I think that accelerating the rate at which we are growing and building will allow us to address the problems that arise. When a lot of the conversation around, oil and gas, coal, other traditional fossil fuels that have been used so long, it's not a conversation necessarily about them as a resource and the usage of them, but around how that's done, how they are extracted from the earth, how they are burned, how we, dispose of waste, etc. And so I think getting ourselves ramped up to address some of those concerns that scientists explain actually requires a pro-growth mindset and a pro-innovation mindset rather than trying to clamp down, quick rush, say, no, based off of existing information, we cannot continue with those. We have to use these alternative sources that are just frankly not realistic with regards to our economic needs, not realistic with regards to our consumption as a country. And I think that degrowth mindset that's become so popular among a certain wing of environmentalist activists is not really feasible with the way in which a market economy works, way in which our society works, frankly. I think that a lot of the misconceptions around the bill more broadly are missing the fact that what this is doing is not favoring those traditional sources over solar and wind, but what it's really doing is leveling the playing field and saying you don't get any advantages. We're not giving you any free money. You have to compete, you have to develop, and you have to meet the needs of the consumers. And if ultimately consumers say, we're concerned with the environment and we're concerned with the impact of these other sources on our world and what that might mean for, having not just clean drinking water, but affordable drinking water. Ultimately, if there's not enough clean drinking water, it becomes very expensive to buy water. Um, if that wins out at the end of the day in the market, then that's how it goes. But this is the administration, I don't think, is taking sides in this, even though it appears that way because it's leveling things out, whereas the previous administration had favored one over the other, particularly these sectors that in solar and wind that for so long have been getting subsidized and have really not made the progress and development that we need to see for them to emerge as the predominant energy source in the United States.
I mean, so you think that's going to be a big win for oil companies because you're saying that the playing field is now even. But we all know that big oil companies had the advantage for years, for decades. And if it's even now, it just means that they hold the advantage of years and decades. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I believe in a competitive marketplace. And so generally we get a competitive marketplace by less regulation, less distortion. And that allows for, new technologies, new ideas, new approaches to win out at the end of the day. What we've already seen long before this environmentalist push that the oil companies have actually been investing in a lot of those newer energy sources, not just solar and wind, which is what we're predominantly talking about, but the geothermal and the nuclear energy. I think has become more and more important in the future. I think we're seeing a lot of nuclear sites approved in the past 6 months since Trump came into office, both um, by Republicans in red states and by Democratic governors. I believe the governor of New York approved their first nuclear plant in several decades. So I think that this presumption that the powers that be will continue in the future is usually not how things play out in history. I think that if there is such legitimate opposition to a certain form, that will emerge. But what really it comes down to, we see throughout time, is that new firms rise up, new technologies and ways of doing things emerge. I think we the internet as it was in the early 2000s is not how it is today. Yahoo is nothing compared to now TikTok, and TikTok has been around for less than 5 years at this point. So I think that um, yeah, while that's kind of how people have thought about this for so long, what we're actually seeing is not just the level playing field with the subsidies, but I think with particularly the regulatory reform, is that's going to allow these newer companies, these newer approaches to grow much faster. They'll be able to scale in a way that they wouldn't have been doing under a continued Biden administration or Harris administration, which would have, yes, given them a lot of free money at the end of the day from the taxpayers, but wasn't letting them grow and expand in the way that they need to in order to ultimately be competitive. And I think that remains to be seen. I'm not a particular market expert in all of this, but I think that from a policy standpoint, we're set up in the best place for that competitive approach.
So let's talk about new technologies. You've mentioned that multiple times now, and you've spoken about geothermal and nuclear. So for long, energy has been dominated by oil and coal. Do you think it's time for the transition where we're going to be seeing more nuclear energy, more geothermal energy? Is it going to be safe? And most of all, how are Americans going to accept it? Is there going to be fear about it? Is there going to be apprehensions about it? Or will there be a much wider embrace?
Yeah, so particularly when it comes to nuclear energy, I think geothermal has just really been developing over a long time, and we're finally getting to a place where that can actually be tried out and used on a scale. But nuclear has faced um, much less so just regulatory burdens. It's faced a lot of public opinion opposition due to some horrific events that happened several decades ago at this point. I think that we're seeing a shift away from that finally. I think people are coming to terms with what happened and how we can do things better this time. But how much there's a need for this energy source, particularly with how much energy we're going to be consuming with artificial intelligence, with other new technologies. And so I do think we're seeing a shift away from that. I think even among an environmentalist community that had some concerns with nuclear energy, large population centers, as well. I think that there's now an openness to trying this again, an openness to new. I think it's particularly just there's new people in charge of business, there's new people in charge of politics. Let these people try it again. We're not going to let the old players do it. We're going to let these companies do it. Particularly, I think there's still pretty strong trust in a lot of the tech companies that are testing it out for AI. I think Google has been at the precipice at this. I think Meta is now getting involved. And there's an understanding that they kind of know what they're doing, even at the end of the day when it comes to this source. But yeah, I think that the biggest challenge that the shift towards nuclear is going to have is public opinion. And I think that deconstructing some of those concerns, why certain things happened before and what will be done this time, is going to be extremely important. I also think that particularly there's going to be a lot of conversations at the end of the day about where those are placed. And I think, people in large population centers and cities are going to be concerned about them being located by them, but might be completely fine with them being in rural areas. But as we know in American politics, geography is everything. And so there will probably be some contention between then those people in rural areas asking why they need to give up space and particular environmental landmarks to build plants. And so I think there's going to be some tension with that. I think it's important for kind of everybody to be open and do their part with regards to trying to make their energy closely sourced by them. So, contributing parts of your community, contributing land and space in your state particularly is the best way for this to be done without it diffusing into a culture war. But that very well could emerge. And I think that's a concern to be had, though I'm optimistic at this point that there is openness from people on both the left and right to nuclear energy, and that hopefully that we can find some sort of consensus and an agreement to do that, because I think it is going to be one of the resources that could really take over the energy sector and be the solution that we're all looking for with regards to this balance between some of these green energy sources that people find are not really affordable or reliable, and some of these traditional energy sources that people have their environmental concerns with.
So let me just touch upon that. You say that green energy sources are something that people don't really find reliable. But if you look at Europe and China, they are doubling down on green tech. And my last question to you is this: the world is moving in a different way. They are prioritizing green tech, green energy, and with the Big Beautiful Act, it seems that the Americans are creating their own path. How do you see that? Is America in line with global understanding of how to go ahead with energy, or do you think there is a way of new innovation, new technology, where America could be the leaders?
Yeah, and I would say I'm rather thankful that the United States is charting its own course, as we tend to do. I think that the regulatory approach of both the EU and the CCP, this kind of top-down bureaucratic way of running the economy, running private markets, is not how we do things. And I think it's a good thing that we don't, because as we understand from a lot of economics research and understanding over time, is that a lot of that way of doing things does not ultimately produce the outcomes that people need. The CCP will go and build tons of skyscrapers, and this empty city where nobody ends up moving to. The EU has absolutely no top performing tech companies at this point due to its hamstringing of regulations with different acts that it's enacted. So I think that, yeah, our kind of hands-off approach and way of letting these different options compete with one another grow, I think with the energy need that we're going to have in the future, honestly, I think of it even sometimes less as competition and more in filling in gaps where the other cannot. And I think, you have residential solar panels, but then gas powered cars, and then nuclear run, AI data facilities. They're all going to be necessary, and that might be how this ends out playing out. But yeah, I think comparing us to other countries is always a big folly in our politics. I think a lot of people love to do this little comparative analysis of, oh, well, France does it this way, then therefore we should do it this way. And it doesn't look at the actual market, the actual economics, the needs of our people, the resources that we have, the supply chain logistics, etc. So no, I don't think that we should be going that path. And I think that ultimately uh, we will see that path is going to inhibit both Europe and China. I think China's AI growth is going to be limited by its energy resource capacity, whereas we have much stronger, not just natural resources within our country, but supply chains with other countries that can export the energy that we need. And so we'll be able to beat them in the AI race because of our energy is able to meet the demands of the AI. I think that the EU is conversation that's come up recently, the amount of heat-related deaths that happen in the EU and the lack of air conditioning. I think that when it comes to infrastructure, comparing ourselves with the EU, well, they have some very pretty buildings, historic landmarks. Modern infrastructure is one of the United States' strengths, and it's been something that is going to develop a lot, I think, under the new administration and some of the new policies set in course, and whether or not I think this kind of third way approach of coupling competition and a little bit more hands off in terms of government spending, but a bit of streamlining of the regulatory process so that projects can happen. I think that could be this kind of abundance approach that is coming into play in politics more broadly from both parties, from people from different factions, from different ideologies, on some other issues. And so that could really play out in the next decade. But that really remains to be seen. But I think at this point, where we are positioned at comparatively in the globe is a much better place than some of our others. And I hope that our allies in Europe and other parts of the world look to the United States, even though they sometimes have a testy relationship with the president, and are able to move in line with that, and so that we can grow with them. And I think that a lot of times that feeds off of each other. If if we understood trade a little bit better in this country, that could happen. But that's where I'm at with it.
Thank you, Sam. That was really engaging, and it was very interesting to learn about where the current administration is heading and how they see the future of energy in America. I think what everybody would have learned is that it's going to be a little bit of everything. One thing cannot be given priority over the other,
Right.
and tried and tested methods cannot be shoved out in one go. I mean, they've been the backbone for years, so might as well keep them there for a while and wait till new technologies emerge, and and slowly begin the energy shift. Thank
Yeah, I think that's a good summary.
yeah. Well, thank you so much, Sam, for your time, and it was great interacting with you.
Thank you so much for having me on.
Join the conversation at Fair Observer and subscribe to our YouTube channel.